this is Zachary Zeidner here with MusicMarauders.com, talking with contemporary jazz bassist Christian McBride. How you doing today?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Pleasure.
Thanks for giving us your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks, man. First off, I noticed your father and your great uncle were both bass players. How influential was this to your decision to play bass?
Well, I saw my father play for the first time when I was, I guess, 8 years old, and he was playing with Mongo Santa Maria. And something about that performance, I remember going home and I told my mother, I said, "Mom, can I have an electric bass for Christmas?" And my mom, being as wonderful as she is, she's like, "Sure, awesome. Whatever you want." And I fell in love with it. And I would have to say that initial impetus came from seeing my father play. But then once I got to junior high school and I now had to play in the school orchestra, I had to, play something that was in the orchestra. And that, of course, was the acoustic bass. And that's when my great uncle came into the picture, because when he found out that I was now taking lessons on the acoustic bass, he turned me on to Mingus, Ray Brown, Paul Chambers, all of the great legendary jazz bass players. So both of them were definitely my two biggest influences.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. Who influenced you to play the bass, and who did you listen to get that influence?
Everybody. Other than my dad and my great uncle, I would say the first bass player who I actually really kind of fell in love with and started to study was Ron Carter.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a recording, not too well-known recording. It was a trio album that he played on from the late 70s called Crossings with Red Garland and Philly Joe Jones. And you know how it is when you discover something for the first time, like every note was just like, wow, 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 what's that? Yeah, what's happening, So Ron Carter was the first bass player who I really fell in love with. Then after that was Paul Chambers, which of course meant that I was listening to a lot of Miles Davis records, so and a lot of Blue Note recordings. So and then later on, Ray Brown became not only a great influence, but he became a great friend and mentor and teacher.
Yeah, you did that super bass with him and John Clayton, which is just phenomenal.
Yeah, so for me, that's the holy trinity: Ron Carter, Paul Chambers, and Ray
if
Brown.
There's three you're gonna choose, those three right there.
Right.
I read that you dropped out of Juilliard after a year to play with trumpeter Roy Hargrove.
Yeah.
What contributed to your decision to drop out of the Juilliard? And furthermore, what was it like being a contemporary jazz musician in the early '90s and dropping out of one of the top jazz institutions in America?
Let's pick another phrase other than drop out. I withdrew. There we go. Well, the reason why I withdrew from Juilliard is because I was working a lot. I knew in my heart that I was in New York because I wanted to be around all my jazz heroes. Every musician I listened to on a recording, they all seemed to live in New York. So I knew that if I wanted to be the best jazz musician I could possibly be, which meant to be around all of the great musicians, I had to go to New York. And I was studying classical music at that time, almost as intensely as I was jazz. So I wanted to keep that up also, so that's why I picked Juilliard. Juilliard had no jazz program when I went there. That jazz program didn't get started until the mid-90s, when Victor Goins started running that. But I got to Juilliard, and within the first couple of weeks I started working in Bobby Watson's band. And from Bobby I met James Williams and Benny Green and Victor Lewis and all of these great musicians who were a real part of they were like the artery of the New York jazz scene, so I really got really deeply entrenched in the New York jazz scene very early in the school year. And by the time Christmas break came around, I started having so much work, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do, because I was working at this club called Augie's, which is now called Smoke. I would be working there till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and then have to be in orchestra rehearsal at 8 a.m. and have a full day of classes, and I was too fried.
It's funny because I immediately think of Miles Davis dropping out of Juilliard.
Right.
He said the same thing. It's like I was playing all the time.
And Chick as well.
Yeah.
Chick Corea. But it was, I think everybody's early days brings back a lot of good memories, and if you look at it on paper, it would look like it was a struggle. but man, I had so much fun. You know, it was fun meeting all these new musicians. You know, Roy Hargrove and I were new in town. Antonio Hart, Greg Hutchinson I hooked up with for the first time, and we became fast buddies. And Mark Carey, I lived with him after I left Juilliard, so it was just such an exciting period.
That's awesome.
Never once did I think, you know, what if I don't make it? You know, what if I have to go move back to Philly and get a regular job? That never crossed my mind, because I knew I was having fun being around all these musicians.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really cool. I see you're pretty involved in the music community, being the creative chair for the LA Philharmonic, as well as holding various artistic director posts. Do you think you could talk a little bit about your work in these areas?
Being in Philadelphia, you know, we had such close access to all these great musicians who lived in New York. Anybody who was on the road living in New York, they had to come through Philly. You know, that whole eastern seaboard, you know, Boston, New York, Philly, Washington, D.C. So we had all kinds of great musicians already in Philly, as well as the national touring musicians. I was fortunate enough that so many great musicians came to spend time with me and Joey DeFrancesco and Questlove. We all grew up together. People like Wynton and Branford Marsalis, Terrence Blanchard, Kenny Barron, Grover Washington Jr., Ron Carter, as I mentioned earlier, Curtis Fuller, the Heath brothers.
Oh, man.
They all were doing workshops for us when we were in high school. And moments like that, I look back on it, you know, I thought, knowing what I know now about being on the road, they didn't have to do that, you know, because I'm sure they were on a tight schedule. You know, they spend time with us during the afternoon and they have to go play a show at night, probably 2 or 3 sets. But they had so much, they took so much pride in teaching us. I always promised that if I were ever in the same position, I would do the exact same thing.
That's real righteous.